Their appointment calendar appeared to be wide open when the delegation reached Moscow.
Where are you from?
We're from Norway.
From Norway?
Yeah.
So while the Soviets attempted to firm up the schedule, the mayor and company played tourist.
I'm going to compromise, Tom, so I get some of that stuff back there.
Some performances were staged just for the delegation. An impressive chamber ensemble played in a 17th century church in Moscow, a church that is now a museum.
It's a clock, actually, and everything was moving. But it doesn't work now. I don't know.
In Leningrad, the delegation was dazzled by a quickie tour of the Hermitage Museum, housed in the Winter Palace built by Peter the Great. It's one of the largest museums in the world.
You have to picture the ambiance, the sound, the elegance with the paintings hanging, the great feasts out here. And of course the juxtaposition is that out in the streets, the people are starving. And of course then you get this, eventually the revolutionary fervor that there's no equity in this.
While the Hermitage was a high point, the famous Kirov Theater was less than satisfying. The building itself was a treat, but the opera disappointed members of the delegation. The top talent was on tour or vacation, a problem the arts delegation encountered wherever they went. There were other disappointments too. Symphony director Wes Brustad listened critically to this rehearsal in Tbilisi. The Soviets lined them up, but was Brustad impressed?
Not really.
Brustad and the rest of the delegation were pleasantly surprised by a jazz group practicing in the same building. They weren't on the agenda, but they were a hit. As it turns out, the Georgians will be the biggest contributors to the San Diego Arts Festival. The Tbilisi State Puppet Theater is included in the bargain the mayor struck with the Soviets. So is an exhibit of rare gold icons from the 10th century. They've never been to the United States. And the Georgian dance troupe is included in the agreement. Not exactly a novelty item. One of their companies is already performing in San Diego this very week. Mayor O'Connor signed a letter of intent in Moscow. The Soviets are also sending a conductor to the opera and an exhibit of Fabergé eggs. Missing from this preliminary agreement is ballet. Of course, the Soviets are known for their classical ballets, but so far, no word on any guest artists. The beauty of St. Basil's Cathedral, the power of the Kremlin. Moscow is known as the center of the Soviet Union. It's a city dominated by unsmiling faces and people who sound like they're arguing even when they're not. There's a lot of open space, but the population is squeezed into never-ending complexes of tall, dreary apartment buildings.
Working man.
Working man.
Working man. Steel, metal, steel, worker, machine.
Steel worker. The further away from Moscow you travel, the friendlier the people become. Leningrad is more relaxed and sophisticated. The city more inviting, with its network of canals and elaborate palaces that date back to Peter the Great. They sing a lot in Tbilisi, almost as much as they toast. Georgians are known for their hospitality, their erratic driving, and their independent attitude. It's sunny and warm in this republic to the south, and that may be why Georgians seem to identify with San Diego.
I like it very much, California. There are very warm people, and the public is like the same than here in Georgia.
Life is changing everywhere in the Soviet Union, and the reason is perestroika, Mikhail Gorbachev's plan to restructure Soviet society. Finally, people are opening up.
Before perestroika, the people talking very loud.
But now, no voice.
Now they speak out?
Yeah.
Encouraged by the new set of rules, Soviets are experimenting. In Moscow, weekend fairs attract huge crowds. It's private enterprise, entrepreneurs selling homemade goods directly to the public.
If it wasn't rewarding, they wouldn't be doing it.
Would-be buyers are hungry for variety.
She says here it's much more beautiful and more modern than in the shops.
Under perestroika, farmers are given incentives to produce more for profit. Shoppers complain prices in these cooperative markets are high, but the quality and selection are good.
If there was no perestroika, there were less flowers and there were less people selling the flowers. It's better now for both sides, for those who are selling and for those who are buying.
This farmer wants to know how much tomatoes cost in the U.S. and how the drought in the Midwest will affect American food prices. Life is changing here, steadily but slowly. People are enjoying their taste of freedom, but they're still holding back, wondering how far they can go, hoping that perestroika isn't temporary.
Нет, вот можно было жить и раньше, но это были договора какого характера?
But as long as the door is open, people like Sergei Naumov are willing to pass through. Until a few months ago, he was a struggling artist. His avant-garde style wasn't acceptable. He wasn't sanctioned by the state.
Сейчас уже я могу продавать картины,
He says now I can sell it.
Да, и стали, так сказать, их вот покупать.
And people are beginning to buy.
Wait, he could not sell before.
Вы не могли бы пораньше до перестройки то самое продать.
Это было бы очень сложно.
It was very, very difficult.
We want to know more about them. They are curious about us. Soviets find Americans intriguing.
I don't know. You know, there is such a proverb in Russian. The forbidden fruit is sweet. So we always were told that America is something bad, something which is not worth seeing and not worth. The life there is very hard, and there are a lot of murders and so on, so on. And that's why I think that a lot of people are really interested in America, that just because it's sweet, it's a forbidden fruit.
They learn English in school. On the street, black marketeers want to buy our dollars, jeans, and cassette players. Anything Western is hot.
You from California? Yeah, I'm from Russia.
You're from Russia? Where'd you get the t-shirt?
T-shirt. This gift. American friend.
This young man didn't want to talk to us. He muttered under his breath that the KGB was watching. Visitors never forget they're in a police state. Military uniforms can be found on every street corner. There's a critical housing shortage throughout the Soviet Union. Most people live in apartments. Here, a family of 5 squeezes into 3 rooms. Cars are a luxury. People depend upon mass transit to get where they need to go. For less than a dime, they can ride the subway or catch a trolley or tram.
I'm very glad.
Newlyweds visiting Lenin Hills in Moscow for a traditional wedding photograph.
Большое спасибо, скажи.
Thank you very much.
Young people hanging out in a Leningrad neighborhood at night.
This is our place.
Georgians scurrying around the kitchen making lunch for surprise guests.
This is
They are among the 290 million people who live in the Soviet Union. Their traditions, their art, and their cities go back hundreds, sometimes even more than 1,000 years. The Soviet people know their history, but they're uncertain about the future. Life is changing here.
It's just the beginning, but at the beginning it encourages them and perestroika helps, they say.
Perestroika is a word you'll hear often in any of the 15 republics. It's come to mean the restructuring of Soviet society. Some people are eager to talk to an American reporter about the changes in Soviet life. Others shy away. They don't trust us.
For years, people just had no idea what's happening in your country, and they had an image of the average American as they thought. Maybe they have never met any Americans in their lives. But, I mean, all the mass media was helping just to create this kind of a stereotype. But now things are changing a lot, and I think we're breaking down this stereotype.
In Leningrad, it's still unusual to see Americans on the streets, especially American camera crews. People are curious, they don't ask questions, they just stare a lot. There are people taking advantage of the new openness that's being encouraged by this country's leaders. This is one of the 2 jazz clubs in Leningrad. David Galachikin began his jazz career 20 years ago, unofficially. Now, his jazz is finding acceptance with the government, with the people.
Many young people listen to jazz music and like it. More and more.
This young woman sitting in the audience plans on visiting the U.S. soon. Perestroika makes it possible.
It's high time for perestroika. Abraham Lincoln, he said once that you can fool some people all the time and all the people for some time, but you can't fool all the people for all the time. So it's high time to stop fool the people, and they feel like just come on, guys, let's start living. And so I think that now it's impossible to turn back this process. So it has begun.
Like so many other young people, Irene and her friend Luba speak English. They're candid with us about their lives and their admiration for Americans.
Just because they respect themselves, they can fight for their rights. For example, if they have the right to go somewhere and they are not permitted, they will fight, they will ask why. And our people, they are rather passive, so to say.
The Soviet people have become used to long lines, doing without, and double standards. Tourists get better treatment.
We're happier, do you think?
Maybe not happy. I don't think it's happiness, but
maybe you can better solve your troubles.
Your problems,
yes, and your problems.
Maybe it's easier for you.
And you seem really happier than we are.
A heated political discussion finds shelter from a cloudburst under a pavilion in the park. The rain doesn't put a damper on opinions, neither does the presence of our camera.
5 years ago, people can't make such discussions, such political discussions.
But now?
But now everyone, if he wants, he can go here and to speak with many people about our problems.
They're impressed when you make an attempt to speak their language, no matter how limited your vocabulary may be. My Russian doesn't go far, but they were very patient.
Я все знаю.
I don't know what they said.
Smiles are hard to find in some cities. In Kiev, people kept to themselves. Few were interested in being interviewed. Perhaps they've had enough attention. They're still coping with the tragedy of Chernobyl, the nuclear disaster that happened nearby. The lives of these 2 teenagers have been altered forever.
2 times a week. So the doctors come to their classroom and they talk to the youngsters and they go through medical check. They also check the radiation level, so in the classrooms around medical school.
According to the guidebooks, Kiev is safe to visit as long as the stay is brief. Soviet visitors to this city sometimes bring their own food and water. Moscow, the home of the Kremlin, the heart of the Communist Party. It's not a friendly city, but many Soviets want to live here. More than 9 million people do. And one of them walked past us wearing a San Diego Zoo t-shirt.
You've been to San Diego?
Yeah, and I saw pandas.
You saw the pandas?
Pandas, yeah.
Another bright spot in an otherwise dingy city is Arbat Street, a place where artists gather and supplement their income by drawing portraits of passers-by. This is serious business.
Меня с мамой, с папой.
So he will keep this portrait for himself, for his parents.
Arbat Street is a pleasant place for a stroll. It's flanked by restored 18th and 19th century mansions that now house shops and apartments. The street is a must for Soviet tourists who don't get a chance to ham it up at home. A must for American tourists is the subway in Moscow. Each station is a work of art. The stained glass wouldn't last a day in New York.
The subway is all important to the people of Moscow. It's clean, it's cheap, it's efficient, and 9 million people take it every day.
For less than a dime, you can take the metro anywhere. But don't dawdle, the subway waits for no one.
I'm from Latin America, Ecuador. He's from Russia, Cuba, and Cuba.
He's one of the many foreign students studying in Moscow. His wife is Russian. They've come to this spot overlooking the city and the stadium built for the 1980 Olympics, the games boycotted by the U.S.
Our invite you to our party.
An invitation to their reception. Tempting, but no time. We had to go shopping to see for ourselves what the stores are like. The big department store in Moscow is called GUM. It should be renamed GLUM. The merchandise is third-rate, and the price is ridiculously high. Until recently, shoppers had no alternative. Weekend fairs are packing them in. It's an experiment in free enterprise, although no one calls it by that name. The atmosphere is carnival-like, a little entertainment, some food, and plenty of merchandise.
He says this is helping the shops because it's giving them competition and therefore the prices will fall.
Not that these prices are cheap. This woman is holding out for 45 rubles for a handmade sweater. That's about $75.
She has a pension of 26 rubles a month. She doesn't have any other way of earning money.
People are desperate for something new and different. They're on the lookout for quality goods that have a more modern look.
He says there is nothing acceptable in the stores.
The government is providing incentives to get people to work harder. Little by little, privately run cooperative restaurants are starting up in parts of the city.
It's kind of like a bar. It's a small bar, yeah. A small private cafe run by a family.
They're on the expensive side, but definitely an improvement over the state-run restaurants with their limited menus and bland food. The government is promising more reform and planning on solving the critical housing shortage by the year 2000. People in the cities live in huge high-rise apartment buildings where families are crammed into just a few rooms. Volodya and Svieta have 3 children, a big family in Russia. The kids are now away at summer camp. They live in a 3-room apartment, kitchen, bedroom, and living room. He's a musician who is blind. She is one of the new entrepreneurs, a baker.
When I am able to go out and do this work, it gives me the opportunity of, well, a change. And Volodya added, yes, to feel more of a person.
They'll use the extra money she earns to pay for music lessons and foreign language tutors for the children. The Soviet people don't think of themselves as poor, but visitors suffer from culture shock when they see the quality of life.
For a superpower, the amount of poverty that we've been seeing is just astronomical. It's amazing. I didn't think I'd see that much poverty.
Muscovites can escape the clutter of the city in Gorky Park. The amusement rides are dated and worn, the souvenir stands filled with junk. But it's green, cool, and tranquil on a hot summer's day. Leningrad owes its history and its beauty to Peter the Great, the Tsar who turned a marshland into a grand city. Once, when it was called St. Petersburg, it was the capital of Russia. Leningrad is a city separated by rivers and canals and connected by hundreds of bridges. A warm night in a Leningrad neighborhood park. Homegrown musicians entertain themselves with music from the past. They find today's rock stars boring. They prefer the familiar names of a different generation.
No, Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, King Crimson, David Bowie, Frank Zappa.
Teenagers with nothing to do cruise the streets. They know a few words of English and like mugging for the camera, just like American kids their age.
You don't like Reagan?
I very like.
Reagan?
Yes.
Then why that button?
I don't have another badge.
It's the only button he could get.
It's a very good president.
We're along the Gulf of Finland, and it's 11 o'clock at night. The sun is still up, people are still out. It's called the White Nights.
Leningrad is close to the Arctic Circle, and during June and July, daylight prevails over darkness. Nevsky Prospect, the city's main street, is bustling with activity at midnight. During the White Nights, the sun dips below the horizon only briefly, for about a half hour in the early morning. Leningrad is also famous for its landmarks. St. Isaac's Cathedral, once the city's largest church, now a museum. The Kirov Theater, home of the opera and the Russian ballet. And the Winter Palace, once the residence of the Tsars, now filled with the treasures of the world-famous Hermitage Museum. Change is apparent in Leningrad. Private enterprise is invading the farmers market downtown. Entrepreneurs are selling clothes they've made, creations like this $70 dress, styles that aren't available in department stores.
It's even less expensive, but the thing is that you can't find this kind of thing in the regular shops. If you've been to any of them, just what you see there, it's less fashionable than here.
Across the street, a long line forms on the sidewalk outside a beer hall. People complain because alcohol is difficult to come by. The government is making it difficult, part of the campaign to crack down on alcoholism.
In this district of Leningrad, they're having, under the anti-alcoholic campaign, they're having just only 2 beer restaurants like that. And it's a big area, there are many people who live here, that's why they're so crowded.
The wait is almost an hour. People are more willing than we thought to talk about the good and bad points of perestroika, the new policy of reform in the Soviet Union. Helen was our Leningrad translator.
Is perestroika changing things here?
Oh yes, very much. And some of the things are real obvious. Well, glasnost, I think it's obvious for every person. Now, to tell the truth, for years it was just boring to read the newspapers. All the same was said in all the newspapers. And now I think it's more interesting and to read a detective story, to read the newspaper Pravda.
Leningrad barely survived World War II. Every third building was destroyed by the Germans during a 900-day siege. Thousands were killed in the bombings. Almost 1 million starved to death. The people tried to save what they could, burying the statues of Leningrad and camouflaging the gilded spires that made such easy targets. The city has been rebuilt, and tourists love to visit. There's so much of the past to see.
Even czars need a change of scenery, and this was Peter the Great's retreat. Across the Gulf of Finland from Leningrad, this is the Summer Palace.
It's called Petra Dvorets. Peter the Great came by boat, like so many of the 2 million tourists who visit the palace each year. They come to see the elaborate system of fountains known as the Great Cascade, and they tour the palace, once destroyed by the Germans, painstakingly recreated by artisans.